I'm Dr. Charles Davidson. As many of you know, I'm the director of the pre-law program here at John Jay. And I'd like to, before we begin, I'd like to say a few thank yous and a few welcomes. First, I'd like to thank, as always, the PLI team, Elizabeth Broccoli, Gerald Kemp, and Sarah Shaw Clark for helping set this up. And I'd also like to, as always, extend a very, very special thank you to Mindy Boxing and Jennifer Lorenzo and their team for making this project possible. I also note that in the audience, we have two very staunch supporters that I like to say hello to. I haven't seen you in a while, and welcome to, and that's Lynn Ross and Norman Green, who are very, very stalwart supporters of this program, of PLI, and of our students. So thank you for being here, and it's nice to see you again, even virtually. It's nice to see you all. I would like to extend a special welcome to a guest we have only for a very short while, and that is Marcus Green. Some of you may know Marcus Green because he's at these functions very often with us, but Marcus is an alum of John Jay College. He currently serves as the Assistant General Counsel at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, the world's largest pharmaceutical company, which, as you can imagine, is obviously a hotbed of activity and very important activity in this moment. So we're really happy that he could join us today. Marcus is going to say a few words to you, but we're really pleased to have you as always, Marcus, and thank you for joining us even briefly. So if you'd like to say a few words to the audience, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you, Charles. You've done just an amazing job with the Pre-Law Institute at John Jay. I mean, I wish it existed when I was in school. I greatly benefited from it. So thank you for your leadership and your service. I'm a proud alumni of John Jay College, and I am honored to be in the Zoom with AG Tong and the other members of the John Jay family. And I want to just thank Lynn Ross for her work, Mindy, John Blakey, Elizabeth Broccoli, again, Charles, for all of your work. And of course, our president, Carol Mason, for all of her leadership, making all of this possible. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I won't take up too much of the time because what the folks that you are gathered here to hear, the individual you're gathered to hear, is A.G. Tong, who is in all respects what I would call a servant warrior for justice. He is one of our finest public servants, and I want you to listen and pay great attention. And so what I want to say first and foremost is that I want to ask the students that are listening and folks that are listening to, this is a very difficult time. The pandemic has gripped everybody. 2020 has been just an incredible year. Just continue to stay focused, continue to do the right thing. And when I say by the right thing, wear your mask, engage in social distancing, and wash your hands, use hand sanitizer, all of those things. And I want to bring a glimmer of hope from Pfizer. I work for Pfizer, and I talk to scientists who are working on the vaccine. I've talked to our administration folks who are working on the vaccine within the company, and we're all very optimistic and we're working really, really hard. But the key thing to remember is that we're going to be guided by the science in terms of timing, making sure that we have something that's safe and efficacious. We are not going to be rushed, and we are working diligently at it, and we hope to have some good results real soon. So the last thing I want to just leave you with, I want to go back to this idea of being a servant warrior for justice, because what I want all of you to think about when you hear A.G. Tong speak, I want you to hear from a chief public servant, but I also want you to hear the humanity from which he speaks. And I think it's important, and I'm always reminded by the words of the late Dr. King when he said that we won't be remembered by the words of our enemies, but by the silence of our friends. And I think in the wake of George Floyd, I think we get caught up in the notion that somehow that these are issues that are related to Black Americans. But you do not have to be Black to stand up for racial injustice. You do not have to be Jewish to stand up against anti-Semitism. You don't have to be a woman to stand up for a woman's rights for equal pay. And you don't have to be lesbian, gay, or transgender to stand up for individuals' rights to love who they want to love and how they want to love. And you just have to recognize the humanity in each other. And so I want to challenge all of you, when you're hearing A.G. Tong speak, think about recognizing the humanity in one another and what you can do as students. You have a very, very powerful voice. There are, some folks think you have to move with large things. You can move with very small things that may seem small. Signing that petition for immigration rights, standing up and helping someone register to vote, helping someone go to the polls to vote. There are many ways for which you can lend your voice and be servants, and be a servant warrior for justice. And so that's the challenge that I leave you with. I'm heartened by my experience at John Jay. It was one of the finest 4 years of my life, and largely because of the collegiality. John Jay, in many ways, like a historically Black college, there is this connectivity among students because for many of us, we're first-generation college students. We're coming at this from a very different experience, whether it's an immigrant experience, whether it's a financially disadvantaged household, and there are ties that bind there. And so I want you to use that as fuel for your success. And I know all of you will do great things. So when you think about service and you think about what you may want to do when you leave John Jay, remember this notion of being a servant warrior for justice in both small and large ways. And so again, I thank all of you, and please enjoy the talk and ask questions, get engaged. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you very much. I always appreciate that you have the power to keep it very real and keep it very inspirational for us all. I think in a moment where I think there's obviously a lot of people are feeling a lot of despair or disheartened in lots of ways, and I think it's so important, as you've done, to remind us to keep the faith in this moment. I really do appreciate your message, and thank you for joining us as always. Pleasure. So on that note, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, which is a real pleasure for us. Those of you who've been at our other Attorney General sessions will know that we have brought Attorney Generals from, I think, New Jersey, I think Maine, maybe New Jersey even twice. But this is I think our first time we've had the Attorney General of Connecticut join us. And it's a real honor, I think, as Mr. Green pointed out, and I've just been reading his bio. This is a person who's really very committed and deeply committed to humanity, really, and right. And when Mr. Green says servant warrior, it's very clear from his bio. A.G. Tong is the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, obviously. Since 2019, he's held that role. Prior to that, he served as a representative in the Connecticut House of Representatives for 12 years. During that time, he was the House Chairman of the Judiciary Committee from 2015 to 2019, and was responsible for legislation related to criminal law, civil rights, constitutional law, judicial nominations, and the judicial branch. Prior to joining public service, he was an attorney at Finn Dixon and Hurling, and he was also an attorney at Simpson, Thacher, and Bartlett. He holds a law degree from the University of Chicago School of Law, as well as a BA from Brown University. On a personal note, he is the first Asian American elected at the statewide level in Connecticut, which is really very, very impressive. And he's a native of Hartford, the oldest of 5 children, and is the son of parents who were immigrants from China. Thank you for joining us today, A.G. Tong. We're very, very, very pleased to have you, especially in this time, which I can only imagine is extremely busy and extremely complicated for you in ways that it is for all of us. But I mean, obviously, in your role as Attorney General, there's a lot to be dealing with today. So thank you again for taking time out to talk to us. as we've thought about this, I thought maybe it would be useful, given that one of the points of this series is to help students understand the work of the Office of the Attorney General, and then, of course, the role specifically of the Attorney General, him or herself. And so I thought maybe you could begin by sort of giving us a high altitude understanding of the work of your office, and then talk about what you do in terms of specifically shaping and molding that vision, and just give us an insight into what does the Office of the Attorney General of Connecticut do?
Well, thank you, Professor Davidson, and thank you, Marcus, for that incredibly generous introduction, and for calling me a servant warrior. That's a pretty high bar. I guess I better not suck in my remarks. So thanks for putting the pressure on, guys. And let me thank John Jay. I am coming to you from Stamford, Connecticut, not too far from the John Jay homestead in Westchester County, and also to Pfizer and Marcus and Lynn Ross and everyone running this program, and the students for being here with us tonight and for having this conversation. Let me start first with a little bit of background, if that's okay, Professor, because I want to speak to the students. I think I see a lot of faces here. I recognize these faces, and I know that the students and I, and probably you, Professor Davidson and Marcus, we share an awful lot, and I'm going to get into that in a second. And before I talk about what I do as Attorney General, the tremendous honor I have to serve as the 25th Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, I know that many of you are thinking about careers in the law and careers in social justice. And let me just share a story about how I got here and why this work is important to me. So my parents came here as immigrants in the early 70s, and my parents met each other in a Chinese restaurant in a place called Bloomfield, Connecticut, which is right outside of Hartford. My dad came here after graduating from college in Canada, and he did the only thing he could do at that time, which was he found work cooking Chinese food. And so a lot of people, he went to Chinatown, New York City, probably not far from where a lot of you go to school. And an employment agency sent him to Bloomfield, Connecticut, to the Hong Kong kitchen, where he met my mom. And they got together and decided to open a Chinese restaurant in Hartford. Trouble is, my dad was on a tourist visa, and he could only be in the country for as long as his visa was active. And at some point, my parents opened a Chinese restaurant, and then after opening, that visa expired. So before I was born, my dad was undocumented. And we think back in those days, you kids have no idea what a payphone looks like, but we think that a rival Chinese restaurant owner probably literally dropped a dime on my dad, which means he put an actual dime in a payphone probably, and called what was then called the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, and that's the precursor to what we all know now as ICE. And an agent came by my parents' restaurant. This agent, by the way, was a customer. And the agent said, you know, Mr. Tong, we love your restaurant and we love this place, but your tourist visa has expired. You've got to go. And so my dad, he just opened this Chinese restaurant with, his new girlfriend. I don't think they were married yet even. And, he was all out of options, and he wasn't going to run. So my mom and dad decided they were going to go back to Canada, where my dad had immigrated from. and they were going to pack up their things, shut down their restaurant, and leave. And as they prepared to do that, one night he was driving home, and he decided, I'm not done fighting. I've come all this way to America. I've achieved my dream of opening a small business, and I'm not just going to give up like that, but I'm not going to run either. So he got home and he sat down and he wrote a 6-page handwritten letter to the President of the United States. And in it, he wrote, story of how he got to this country, how he committed no crime. He was on a tourist visa. He just wanted an opportunity. He's got this girlfriend, and they want to build a life together. And he literally begged. He begged for the opportunity to stay in this country. And he sent that letter off, and he thought, that's it. I'm done, right? I'm cooked. I'm going to have to pack up and leave. Shortly before my parents were going to leave the country and shut down their restaurant, that same INS agent came back to my parents' restaurant, handed my father a letter from the Attorney General of the United States. And it said, the President has received your letter. We are going to let you stay in this country. You have to go to the back of the line and wait your turn. My dad did not become a citizen until many years after I was born. I think I was about 7 years old. But we welcome you to this country. And it was because of an extraordinary act of grace and kindness by our Republican president, Richard Nixon, that my father was able to stay in this country after being undocumented, and I was born the first American in my family. Now, some of you maybe heard this story and are thinking to yourself, is that true? And for many years, I've told this story exactly 7,000 times, okay? And I've always been concerned about embellishment in the story and whether or not my immigrant parents maybe, told me a story that isn't entirely accurate. So for a long time, I've sort of peppered my parents, and I've been like, is this really happened? So last year, my parents went to a funeral in California, and they went to the Richard Nixon Presidential Library. And they went up to the front desk, the information desk, and they said, here's our story. I wrote a letter to President Nixon in 1972. I got a letter back. Do you happen to have any records of this letter? And this, clerk at the Presidential Library said, well, give me your info and telephone number, and we'll type it in, and we'll see what we have. A couple weeks later, my mom gets an email from the Richard Nixon Presidential Library, and attached is a PDF of my dad's letter from 1972. It is unbelievable. And it happened at Christmas. It was a Christmas miracle. And sure enough, I see this letter, and my dad wrote to President Nixon and begged for the opportunity to stay in this country. And the immigration system, a system of justice, worked for my parents. And it's because of that I'm able to serve as Attorney General. And so if you want to know why I have chosen a life in public service and why it is an incredible honor for me to be an Attorney General, that's why. I think that's why I do so much on the immigration front, because if you're lucky, as I am, you will find, I think, the most fulfillment in your work. And I hope that all of you go to law school and all of you become lawyers. You will find the most fulfillment when you see yourself in your work. And one of the areas in which, so turning to Professor Davidson's question, one of the areas in which I'm most active is in protecting and defending the families of Connecticut, including our immigrant families, because I believe that the President of the United States, unfortunately, has declared war on America's immigrants. And that includes my family and many of us. And so why do I say that? I say that because when the president spoke of denaturalizing American citizens, he's talking about my parents. They are naturalized American citizens. And then when he goes further and he says that he wants to get rid of, or he wants to attack anchor babies, he's talking about me. I'm an anchor baby. Kamala Harris is an anchor baby. Okay, our parents were immigrants. They were not yet citizens. My parents were not yet citizens when I was born. And so I fit the definition. And when people say to me, A.G. Tong, I can't believe that, our immigration system is the way that it is, and we separate children from their families at the border and we put them in cages, and then we lose track of the kids so that we can't reunite children with their parents. It's incredible to us. We can't believe our immigration system is so broken. How can we, such a proud country based on, freedom and equality and personal liberty, how can we have a country that commits such injustices? I can't believe it. I remind people, I can believe it because we've done it before. This country committed the original sin of slavery, and we separated children from their parents then. And more than 75 years ago, we separated Asian American, Japanese American citizen families from their homes and from each other and from their children, when we put 125,000 American citizens in camps on American soil. And so I think it's always important to have that perspective and to see yourself in your work, because nothing will motivate you more than that, than to get up in the morning and to fight for people that look just like us. And let me close by saying that it really came into focus for me. I fought for this family, the Huang family in Simsbury, Connecticut. If you've ever been to Simsbury, Connecticut, it's like what you picture, suburban Connecticut, Christmas in Connecticut, it's a perfect place. And the Huangs own a nail salon, and they were nearly deported, and working with the governor, we were able to stop their deportation. My sister Judy works not too far from you at the New York Times, and she happened to come across a story about the Huangs, and she texted me a link to the story, and she said in her text, that could easily be us. And I think we always need to remember that I think many of the students here on this call, many of your peers, all of what's happening to immigrants in this country, all of what's happening to people of color in this country, women, members of the LGBTQ plus community, people in this country who have a target on their backs, and so many of us do. We should always remember that could easily be us. And so that is a big part of what I do every day. And I hope that helps you and helps guide your work as students, and hopefully leads you to law school.
Thank you for that. I think that is that's an incredibly powerful story, right? I think it is, and I think you're absolutely correct. It's a story that resonates with many, if not all of us, for different reasons, and I think it's particularly topical given the national reckoning we're having with some of these issues around racial inequality, with these conversations we're having around immigration. And I think it's really it's very useful for you to humanize it in that way. And I do appreciate that story. I think we all do. One of the things I think that we talk about with our students, and one of our goals is, of course, to expand what our students think of as sort of pathways in law, right? So
Mhm.
many of our students are interested in issues of obviously civil rights, issues of criminal justice, issues of advocacy and reform. One of the things our students don't very often think about, though, is the Office of the Attorney General as a place to sort of advocate or sort of promote or push those goals as lawyers. And what you've described to us is a place where actually that happens in some ways. You're at the forefront of these issues at the state level. And so could you talk to us about this sort of a career in the Attorney General's
Yeah.
office for people who are interested in these things, as including immigration, civil rights, and some of the things you've alluded to in your conversation?
So when I get up in the morning and Tish James, who's your Attorney General in New York, gets up in the morning, or Maura Healey, who's the AG of Massachusetts, they're rock stars, by the way. I mention them for a reason, because they're doing incredible things. When we wake up in the morning, we're lawyers for our states. And that is 80-90% of what we do. And I didn't start there, even though you asked the question. I didn't start there because I wanted to tell you why I do this work. But that is an incredibly important part of our job, and it's an honor to do that work, to represent the state, all of its state agencies, officials, and to help the state do its work. And that includes everything from building roads and bridges and running a criminal justice system to providing social services and public services to people, and it runs the gamut. But the stuff that makes the paper, the 10-20% of our jobs, is our affirmative work. And the affirmative work means work that we choose to do to protect and defend and advance the interests of our citizens. The biggest example of that, and Lynn was a part of this, is the big tobacco case, which is largely and widely referred to as the Big Bang of Attorney General coordination. It is when attorneys general looked at each other and said, hey, we can team up and take on a gigantic industry together. And I think I just sued ExxonMobil, by the way, for climate change and to hold them accountable for climate change. Taking on ExxonMobil is a huge undertaking. But what I've told people is, when they say, wow, have you bitten off more than you can chew? I say no, because we took on big tobacco. And big tobacco was just that big, so much bigger than most other industries in the world by orders of magnitude. And we took them on as states, and we beat them. And we cut smoking by half in the 20 plus years, almost 30 years now, since we entered into that settlement. And in particular, we have really attacked and considerably cut down the epidemic of youth smoking. We now have a different epidemic with Juul and opioids. That's a different issue. But the big tobacco case made a huge impact, and still to this date pays states billions upon billions over the years because of big tobacco's misconduct. So our affirmative work extends from there to our antitrust work. I am leading the generic drug price fixing case, where 49 states are suing the generic drug manufacturers for illegal and anti-competitive price fixing. They're talking amongst themselves and setting prices artificially high. They're also colluding so that they don't compete with each other. That is highly illegal under the law. We're working together. You may have heard today about an investigation, an antitrust case against Google. We are part of that, and also investigating Facebook. And so those are examples. Juul is another one, and opioids. Opioids before COVID was, not to be too flip about it, the reigning public health crisis in our country. It still is. And attorneys general are largely allied in taking on the addiction industry, including the manufacturers and distributors, in the same way we took on big tobacco. Let me answer the question of why this is. The short answer is whoops, sorry, phone ringing. The short answer is because we have expansive consumer protection authority and powers, state attorneys general can come together to take on these huge interests, right? And to protect people from unfair, drug prices, from opioids, from youth smoking. But one of the real reasons why is because states have found their voice again. As Washington has trouble getting its work done because of gridlock and because of partisanship, and the Congress and the president are in many respects unable to discharge their basic constitutional functions, like raising bills, passing laws, passing budgets, and confronting all these challenges: gun violence, the climate, right, drug prices, opioids. Because they are unable to advance those causes and advance real legislation to confront them, those fights fall to the states. And what people have rediscovered is that we are not one big monolithic country, and you'll study this in law school. We are still a federation of 50 sovereign states joined by our consent in the United States of America. And what that means is that each of us Connecticut retains some sovereignty, a great deal of sovereignty, has delegated limited powers to the federal government. But like New York, we're a sovereign state, which means we have a governor and a legislature and our own criminal justice system, our own law enforcement, and we can decide to do what we want to do in our own states, to a significant extent. And we can decide that the federal government's not doing enough, or people aren't doing enough about opioids, and that we're going to join together and do it ourselves. And it's because of that vacuum, in many respects, that states have become more prominent and state attorneys general have taken lead on all of these issues.
Thank you for that. You actually answered a question that I had, and it was about this idea that in the reality that we're living in, where state attorney generals have actually, in lots of ways, been a bulwark against the federal government and many of its depredations in the last few years. And so it's very interesting to see, and I know that you have joined in with other attorneys general on a variety of issues. Could you just talk about a couple?
Yeah, it's hard to think of, frankly, and this is not a conceit. It's just a fact. It's hard to think of a major public policy issue that we are not either on the front lines of or leading ourselves. So, for example, the fight over the Affordable Care Act, that's between state attorneys general before the Supreme Court. The so-called Muslim or travel ban, that was fought by state attorneys general. There's no citizenship question on the census because of state attorneys general. The DACA case, June Medical, which was the last abortion case, Bostock, which was the employment discrimination against the LGBTQ plus community. State AGs had huge roles in those cases. And so, if you look at the constellation of public policy fights where something is actually happening, right? Where we're not just talking about it. More than a preponderance of those cases and fights are led by state attorneys general. Again, because of this phenomenon of state by state sovereign coordination, number one, and then the absence of an alternative. It was, Republicans called it states' rights. Democrats, now we come up with this term called progressive federalism. Doesn't really roll off the tongue as well as states' rights, but it's the same idea, right? It's the same idea that we're asserting our rights on behalf of our citizens in the name of our states.
And just in keeping with that, and this is a personal interest of mine, and you've mentioned the issue of federalism, but it just makes me think about the sort of relationship between institutions. And as the Attorney General, what is the role or the relationship, let's say, of the Attorney General and the governor? Obviously, you have a great degree of leeway and flexibility, but what is that relationship at the state level between your office and the governor?
So it depends. You mentioned the New Jersey Attorney General, Kabir Grewal. He is an appointee of the governor, and so his relationship is different. I'm sure, and I don't know because I don't live in New Jersey and I don't live in that space, but I'm sure there's some independence from the governor. But Kabir has responsibility for the entire law enforcement system, including to a significant extent the criminal justice system. I don't. So I have almost no criminal jurisdiction. I'm more of an old school AG, where I am elected by the people. I am an independent constitutional officer, which means that I exist not by the grace of the governor, but by virtue of the Constitution. The Constitution of Connecticut says there shall be an Attorney General, and the people shall vote for the Attorney General. And so my relationship with the governor is as his lawyer only to the extent of his official duties. So I represent the governor when he is sued in his official role as governor, but I don't really day-to-day serve as, well, I don't serve day-to-day as his personal counsel, nor do I serve as his counsel in his office, right? I am a freestanding independent constitutional officer, and when the governor gets in a jam, he picks up the phone and he says, William, I need you to jump in on this. It's true about state officials across Connecticut. I represent all of them. And so I also have, even though the governor and I are of the same party, and we have an attorney-client relationship, we also have this arm's length relationship. And for most of Senator Blumenthal's 20-year tenure as Attorney General, well, all of it, he never had a Democratic governor. And so it was always a Democratic AG and a Republican governor in Connecticut during those years. And so the relationship was very different, but it's an independent one.
Thank you very much for that. I see that we are at about the 15-minute mark, actually, and so I did want to open the floor to other people and their questions. And I see we do have a really very interesting question, a question I think that I'm very interested in, and I think that all of us are. The question says, were there any challenges to you getting your position being a first-generation Asian American?
So I'm full of stories. I'll try to tell this one quickly, but this one sums it up. As Professor Davidson mentioned, I was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee for at least 4 years. I wrote and passed every law of consequence in terms of criminal justice, second chance society law, bail reform law, excessive use of force law, the domestic violence gun law. All of that is my work. And when I ran for Attorney General, I entered as the front runner and the leader in that race. And one day I went to a town in the middle of the state and I asked a delegate, we have an old school convention, you need delegates and they vote for you at the convention, so you earn the party nomination. And I asked this woman lawyer, Democrat woman lawyer, I said, would you please support me in the race for Attorney General? And she said, William, I have been watching you and you have done incredible work. All of these laws that you've passed, just every issue that I care about, you've been such a leader on. I really appreciate it. I said, great. So I can count you as one of my supporters. She said, no, I'm sorry. I can't support you. I got to support the other guy. I said, why? She said, well, it's just, you don't look like what I think an attorney general should look like. The other guy was a white male, just so we're clear. So has it been challenging? Is it hard? It'll always be hard for us. And as I look at all the students, it'll always be hard for us. And as Marcus said, use that to fuel your work and your hard work and your dedication. See yourself in your work. That'll get you up in the morning. But it'll always be hard. And the hardest thing is that people don't, especially for Asian Pacific Americans, this is a whole nother Zoom, but we're in many ways invisible. And, right now there's a national reckoning about race, which is long overdue. But I try to, when people talk about Black and brown communities, I sometimes have to say, did you forget us? And where do we fit in that? And because we're invisible, and who's invisible? The people down on Mott Street and Canal Street who live 20 people to an apartment, who work all day and all night in a Chinese restaurant like my parents did. And then they go to OTB afterwards, off-track betting, and they gamble their earnings away. And there's nobody there to help them. There's nobody there to provide social services or worry about what happens to them. The crime in their community goes unpunished, unvindicated. The sweatshops that people work in go unaddressed because Asian Pacific Americans are invisible in this national conversation. So that's the biggest challenge that I confront every day. And I think a lot of us know how that feels.
This is very, very important. I do think, and it's one of those things, and I am someone who's been very much involved in this conversation around the reckoning, this racial reckoning, and it is very true. I think there is this invisibility, and then there's, of course, the model minority issue, right? That's also sort of abstracts this population from the real attention that it merits. So I thank you for saying that, which raises a question for me. Hearing all that you've done, listening to what you've overcome, how you sort of rose to this place through hard work, obviously, and through obviously talent. And you've done an enormous amount for people, right? Who may not ever, and some who can't necessarily even aspire to achieve what you've achieved. You've done an enormous amount. What looking back over the course of your career, what do you hope your legacy will be, given all that you've done and given all the sort of emphasis you've put on these issues that really attend to populations who may be marginalized in some way? What's the legacy you're leaving?
I think all of us leave our legacy one person at a time, and I don't say that in a cheesy way. It was once said, and I think it was House of Cards or something, some bad political TV show, that politics is about collecting people, right? Relationships, connections. And that's a bad way of looking at it. But politics and government service and public service is also about helping each individual person you encounter as much as you can. Right. And already I'm really proud to say that I can look back and I can think of all the people like the Huangs, like Waizara Walton and Richard Thompson, and people whose lives we saved and we helped because of our work in our office. And we're not collecting people, but we're impacting people. We're changing lives one person at a time. The other thing I would say is, I think the best thing I can do in the legacy that I hope that I leave is to show people how important and how possible this work is, in that it's going to be hard and you have to persevere, and I don't get paid very much money for it. And it is so critical, particularly right now, that I do this work, right? That I be there for America's immigrants, for example, or I be there for people that are paying exorbitant prices for prescription drugs. And I think people are scared off by this enterprise of service and politics, and they're scared off by winning and losing. Politics is all about how you get up off the canvas. A wise person once told me that, and I think we should all live by that, right? Whatever you decide to do in your life, you're going to win, you're going to lose. The key is to win more than you lose, and the key is to always get up off the canvas. When you've been knocked down, always get back up. And I've been knocked down a number of times. I was finished and left for dead, even in my short career, a couple of times, and I bounced back. And the one thing I'll say also is what inspires me are my parents, in that I always remember whatever I'm going through, what they went through was 100 times harder, and so I can suck it up.
You have sort of addressed this, but I think it's worth speaking to quite directly, because we do have a student question that says, and I think this really will encapsulate everything we've talked about. The question is, what, if any, advice do you have for minority students who are working towards law school and hoping to create change?
Find a mentor and recognize that chances are your mentor will not look like you. That's still the case, because there's still too many firsts, and there aren't enough of us in positions of power, influence, and authority to help us to reach back, right? I'm the first, which means there was nobody before me. Okay, so I didn't have an Asian Pacific American attorney general who gave me advice and told me, William, this is how you do it. I had a white male mayor of Stamford, Connecticut, who became the governor, God bless. And I got lucky that he became the governor, and he was there for me. He gave me great advice. He threw the occasional block and elbow to help me along the way, and he pulled me along with him. And it's because of him and other mentors like him, and other hers as well, she's, who were there for me along the way. And they didn't look like me. They weren't Asian Pacific American. And that's going to be hard for all of you, right? If you're a woman, to ask a man. If you're, a person of color, to ask a white person with whom you may not have experience, or a person from another community of color. But you have to insist on it. You have to find a mentor with whom you have some common ground and insist on that relationship. You gotta, I sort of imposed myself on Governor Malloy, and he finally gave in and mentored me. People don't, especially like really successful people who are dedicated to their jobs, they don't always have time, right? They have limited bandwidth. So you just got to fight for their bandwidth and their time, because they have seen things over a career that you won't have seen. And having their guidance and insight, and what they do for you is they help you ask the hard questions about yourself and why you're doing it and what your argument is. And that by the way, that's like the biggest thing. Whenever somebody comes to me and says, I want to run for office and I want to do what you do, I ask them why. What's your argument? Why should people care? Right? What's good about you? Why should people have any confidence in you? And you've got to learn to do that. You've got to learn to advocate for yourself. You've got to learn, but you also have to know that in your heart and that answer. And my mentor challenged me to do that. I wouldn't have gotten that if I didn't have the time with him, right? I would have just been just like any other aspiring politician. I would have made every move that I think I have to make, right? And know every person that I think I have to know, but I wouldn't have found that voice. And he helped me find it. So find a mentor, like now. It's really important.
A question I have for you, and I think it's an interesting question, just around the pathway.
Yeah.
And thank you for that insight about mentorship, because I think that is one of the things that we all know is quite important. I think we all also have our blockages and our barriers of seeking them, right? Particularly people of color. It's a thing that feels a little bit awkward and uncomfortable, just as we see sometimes in the networking context, that maybe we aren't as comfortable doing it and as we should be, because it is really a crucial element. But one thing that I want to ask is that when you were a lawyer in private practice, when you were at the firms, was politics a goal of yours, or was
Sure.
it something that developed over the course of just watching what was going on around the world around you, or was this always a sort of a long-standing interest that you knew when you became a law student that politics was your ultimate end game?
Service and government service, and in particular elected service, has been with me for a long time. The truth is, I knew I wanted to run before I knew why I wanted to run. And even late, after college, after law school, when I wanted to run for this or that in Stanford, I struggled to articulate a reason, and I don't know if I knew it at the time, but in hindsight, I know it, that I wasn't ready, and in addition to mentoring, I think I needed the experience of working in a law firm, of working in the private sector. This is just speaking about me personally, of volunteering on some nonprofit boards, running other people's campaigns. I needed to learn to speak all of that language. And I draw on it every day, when I walk into a room full of big, fancy, 5,000 suit lawyers, right, who represent the biggest companies in the world, including Marcus, right, and Pfizer, and just between us, I've got major litigation with Pfizer that's public. It's because I worked in a major New York City international law firm that I can walk in and hang with them. I'm not afraid of them because I've been on the other side of the table. And so part of, the advice that comes from this is don't rush, make sure that you live a little, learn a little. I have a lot of colleagues, young phenoms who get elected at 21, 22, and they're great and they're refreshing and they have such energy, but they've got a limited amount to say because they don't have a lot of experience to draw on. And so in addition to getting mentors, find those experiences that really enrich your life and your experience and your contribution. Because by the way, those are the experiences that you will draw on to tell your story, right? If you don't have those experiences, then you'll have no story to tell.
Thank you. I know we've come to the very end, but I do see that there's a student comment that I missed, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the student question. And if we could just do this briefly, it would be great. But the question is, what were the major challenges you faced in getting elected?
Boy, I've noted a bunch of them. I think apart from making sure you have a mentor, being able to articulate from your heart why you're doing it, doing all the things you have to do in a race, knock doors, raise money. I think the thing to keep in mind, and there's one more question, what advice for minority students? I'm gonna flow that into this question, which is understand, especially for all of you students who are the sons and daughters of immigrants or people of color or women, there are gonna be a lot of haters out there, and they're just not gonna see it. They're not gonna see you. They're not gonna see your potential. They're just not gonna get it, right? Because to use a football analogy, you're not 6'4" and you don't throw the football 50 miles per hour, right? You just don't look like what they expect. Remember my story. And you need to believe in yourself more than the average bear, right? And you really have to, that's why the conviction and knowing why you're there and why you do this work in why you want to achieve what you want to achieve, and what your personal narrative is, why you're here. There's a reason why I told you that story at the outset, because I wanted you to see what I do, but also how I get there, right? You've got to dig deep and mine your personal experience, M-I-N-E, mine your personal experience and find all of what's good about you and show it to people. That's not easy to do, right? And even when you do all of that with incredible good faith, right? I mean, I know Professor Davidson's gone through this too. You show up and you've got incredible good faith and good intention, and you brought all of it, right? They're still no, I'm not buying it. That's going to happen a lot to you. But you have to have confidence, and there's a certain certainty about your cause and your mission that you have to have. And if you can get there, then you will be successful.
Tong, thank you very much. I want to respect the fact that you need to leave at 6. So I just want to say in closing, just personally, before I thank you on behalf of everyone, I just want to say for myself, this has been a wonderful conversation. It's actually been such a conversation that I feel is such a John Jay conversation, such a conversation that I think is so perfectly pitched to our students. I think it's just wonderful for us to see someone like yourself to come to speak, and who speaks right at the point where we need it. It's pitch perfect in that regard, and I think you have spoken frankly. But I think the beautiful part of it is in your frankness. It's just been inspirational. It's really been inspirational. It's been motivational. I think for me, I can relate to so much of what you said, but I know that for our students, it's really, really very important to hear it from you. And so I really sincerely would like to thank you so much for taking the time out and talking to us. It was the quickest hour we've had, and it was really, really wonderful. And I took away a lot, and I'm sure that all of our students did. So thank you very much on behalf of the college, on my personal behalf, and on behalf of all the students. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank yous are pouring in. So we're looking forward, and students, please stay in touch with us, and we'll be talking to you soon. All the best. Thank you all for everything. Good night.